Hey everyone, welcome back to my shop. I've got an odd piece of walnut here. This came from my friend Alan's house. I milled up a walnut tree that he gave me, and I had some crotch pieces and milled them up. He got some, and this is what I've kept. It's a bit too small to be a table, and I don't need any more charcuterie boards. So I think I'm going to make a stool out of it. I was searching around YouTube, and Paul at Canadian Woodworks, he calls it a guitar picking stool. It's like a Sam Maloof leg design. So I sent him his $4, got the plans, and he's got videos that show you how to make the jig and everything. So I'm going to do that. First, I do need to flatten this a little bit. So I'm going to cut some of the length off of it, just get the rock out of it, and then I think I'll finish it off on the CNC. I could have used the CNC to flatten this, but then I'd have to go to the house and I'd have to do a program just to flatten this area rather than the whole bed of the CNC, or I'd have to stand there and manually do it. So it occurred to me I could just use my drum sander. I did take the PDF plans and I did make some templates on the CNC out of some MDF material, but my piece or the seat part is not big enough, so I am going to have to cheat it a little bit. The center leg's pretty straightforward. I just put that on my center line. And then for the other two legs, I've just made a mark on the template and I've wrapped it around both sides, and I'm just going to put it back on there and then mark that on the piece of wood. My first trip to the bandsaw was to create the flat areas where the legs are going to attach and where I also clamp the router jig to. Once I got the seat ready for the Maloof joints, I was able to give it a bit more shape. Unfortunately, on the sides, there's still some live edge that's coming in, and also on the bottom. I'll just have to incorporate it into the seat. I could make that the top because it is going to get quite a dish, but the bottom here is not nearly as nice as the figure here on the top. So for the legs, I think we'll go with something other than walnut, and I have some jatoba, also known as Brazilian cherry, but it's at the very top of my rack. I knew when I glued up my legs I was going to have an issue. I was using rough sawn material that was 6/4 thick, and the directions called for the finished blank to be 3 inches, and I knew I was going to make that. So what it's going to mean is that instead of my seam being perpendicular to the seat, it's going to be parallel to the seat. I have a sawmill, and 6/4 finished material is kind of something I don't do often. I do 6/4 rough sawn, but yeah, bit of an odd duck. I do have some thick pieces, but it's a lighter colored wood like pecan, and I didn't want it to contrast that much. So I'm just going to go with it. I've made a crosscut sled for my dado stack, and I have a piece of scrap here, and I'm just adjusting the height of the dado stack itself so that it fits nicely in the recess of the seat blank. There's still too much of a gap, so I'm going to raise the blade slightly. I'm not so worried about the distance measurement. I'll worry about that later. It's mainly the depth of the dado cut. It's pretty tricky to cut the legs. The angled part is your reference face, so that's going to be down or against the fence. And then you got to rotate the leg 180 to cut the last side. I used some playing cards to get the dados to match up, and I was coming over here and test fitting it on the seat, and I'm pretty close. I'm going to cut the 3/4 inch radius, and then I will individually number them and finesse them each to fit in their corresponding number. My test pieces were not fitting properly. The radius wasn't matching, so I double checked all my router bits, and sure enough, my radius bit is a 1/2 inch radius, not a 3/4 inch radius. So I ordered the proper one, and I'm going to go ahead and do my test pieces again, and then machine the legs. So the legs have their basic shape. I was just sitting here wondering if I should put a radius on the corners. I don't think it's going to put me any further ahead. I'm going to use a cut-saw disc to give the seat some shape. So I think I'll just wait till it's all glued up and use that, and maybe some flat discs as well with my little die grinder. I'm also not going to use glue because I will use glue. I'm going to use epoxy because it's such a tight fit with the legs that when I put the glue on, it's going to swell the joints and make it harder to fit. So I'm going to use epoxy, and that gives me a bit more open time as well. So I think we're ready to glue it up. My goal today is that the pith of the tree is right here, and I want to be able to fill that with epoxy by the end of the day. I'm also a little concerned that my legs are sticking out quite a bit. The depth of my jig here is 1 inch, so it makes a 1 inch cut into the wood. But I think if I was to do it again, I might go a little deeper. It's a bit early, so we'll see as the day goes on and I'm shaping it. It's taken about 2 hours to get as far as I have with shaping the seat with that cut-saw disc. It's not the most aggressive disc, and I bought it for something else. But if I was to do it over again, I'd probably buy the most aggressive disc. The walnut is pretty soft, but this part of the tree, the crotch area, you've got those 2 limbs and they're up there and they're moving around constantly, which compresses that area, making the wood very dense, very hard. And the disc I'm using is making a dent in it, but it's taking a lot of work. I think I've got 2 hours in it. It probably would have taken only about an hour if I used a different disc. I've still got plenty to do. The pith section went from about 4 or 5 inches long down to just about a half an inch. So I'm just going to put a little epoxy in that. And then also I started shaping with a sander. And I've got these little pads. They're intermediate pads and they're quite soft. And I started using that with 80 grit sandpaper because I don't have 60 grit. It works pretty good, but not for shaping. It's too spongy. So for shaping, I take this pad off, and then I just use the pad that's on the sander. I'll also put links below for everything I'm using for this build. The pith area was quite small, so I just ended up using some medium thick CA glue. For the knot on the side of the seat, I make a little dam with caulking, and then I use the epoxy with some black mica powder. It's a little chilly outside, so maybe this afternoon. So I'm going to try and do what I can inside the shop. I've got a spoke shave, a rasp, a scraper, and I'm going to see if I can refine the seat and legs a bit in the shop. I've also got a pencil, and I just went and I hit the low spots so that they show up a bit better, and I'll just work on them before moving on to the legs. The spoke shaves worked pretty good, but what worked the best is the Shinto rasp for just taking the high spots out of the seat to get everything nice and level. But what really worked well is the card scraper. And I've gotten rid of all the little scratches to the point where I think I can probably skip a grit or two of sandpaper on the top. You could finish it completely with a card scraper, but not me. I'm just going to finish this off and then start on the legs. I'm pretty happy with the height of the stool, so I'm just going to use a Japanese saw and a piece of plywood. Just make a mark around the legs so I can have a saw line just to flatten out the legs. That's sitting quite nice now. I'll put like a chamfer or a radius on those so they don't splinter when it gets slid across the floor. Also, the legs are not Brazilian cherry, they are mahogany. I don't know what I have up there. Just a bit more shaping to do before heading back outside. Using that intermediate pad on the sander, I went up to 220 grit on the bottom, the sides, and the legs. I did hit a couple spots on top, but I decided I will try and do a scraped finish. So I'm going to touch up a few spots, and then we'll go to a finish. For the finish, I'm going to use 100% tung oil. Although the first couple of coats, it's going to be thinned down about 25% with some citrus solvent. After letting the tongue oil sit on the surface for about 15 minutes, I come back through with a clean rag and wipe off all the excess. I think I'm going to leave it at 4 coats. I don't really seem like I'm gaining anything after that 4th coat. So I'll leave it at that, and I think it looks fantastic. The crotch part is quite challenging to work with. It was quite hard. I would use that more aggressive cut-saw disc if I was to do another piece, and I will do another piece. And the legs, they look fine, but I think I would go an extra 1/4 inch on the jig. So the depth of cut would be 1 1/4 inches rather than 1 inch. And that would make the legs go in just a little bit more and give you a bit more beef on the legs to shape. But I mean, these look fine. I don't really think there's anything wrong with them, but I would just like to try it. Another nitpicky thing is I can see a seam when I have a strong light like the video where the scraping meets the sanding. When I was using the sandpaper to do the radius, I could see where they met. So the scraping is a bit darker, and the sandpaper leaves a bit more of a matte finish. So, you know, stick with one or the other, or kind of wrap that the scraping around the radius a little bit to hide that matte finish, because the light would hit the side differently, so it would look all right. I do see a couple spots where I missed, but you know, this was a learning experience, and I'm very happy with it. The spots that had the live edge creeping in, they're noticeable. You can see them, but they kind of disappear into the different flowing shapes of the seat, so it's not an issue at all. If you have any questions, list them down below. Hit that like button. Better yet, subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.